feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled Movie Review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside. He's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Approved.
Approved.
Approved. Matt, are you ready to take a look around?
I accept this mission. I do.
Did you get my Limp Bizkit reference there?
Oh,
Take a look around is from Mission
Mission
Impossible 2.
2. Yeah,
Yeah.
Limp Bizkit. What a time. What a time. I loved Limp Bizkit. I don't know if everyone knows this, but I can rap many Limp Bizkit songs from
It's
start
just
to
one of
end.
those days.
If you go to karaoke with Matt, he might do a Limp Bizkit song. But yes, today we are reviewing another part 1 in Christopher McQuarrie's Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Probably one of the best titles of a movie of all time. I remember when this got announced, I'm like, just incredible. And it continues the trend lately. I mean, I don't know when this trend even began. I guess I'm thinking like Harry Potter with the last one, but that's not probably even the first part 1 and part 2.
Well, there was Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2, but that was something where it was paying homage to, Kung Fu cinema specifically and Hong Kong cinema, where, you look at Avengers Endgame and Infinity War, or even the Hobbit movies, the one book being stretched out to 3 films, or you mentioned Harry Potter. But more recently,
the third one this year, right? We had Fast X Part 1. We had Across the Spider-Verse being a Part 1, even though not necessarily having Part 1 in either of those titles. We had Dune a couple years back, and we're getting Dune Part 2 this year. So,
all with Dune actors too, right? Like you have,
right.
Dune 1 and 2 with Oscar Isaac, and Jason Momoa and Rebecca Ferguson. Jason Momoa is in Fast X, which is going to be possibly 2 or 3 films, depending on what Vin Diesel says. And then you have Across the Spider-Verse with Oscar Isaac and Rebecca Ferguson in Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1.
It all comes full circle. But yes, this is going to be briefly spoiler free, just to give our quick thoughts of what we thought about the movie, and then we're going to go straight into spoilers since the movie is now playing everywhere. And they tried to get in this caught me by surprise. I'm like, the movie's already out. I thought it was this Friday, but it's in theaters. It started playing Monday night even. Because Eric and I were talking off air before we started that we think they wanted to get into those premium formats before Oppenheimer and Barbie come out next week. So let's get right into it. So Eric, this being Christopher McQuarrie's third Mission Impossible movie, the first one since the second that Bad Robot and J.J. Abrams had nothing to do with, which I think is interesting. We'll get into. I'm going to kick it over to you first. What did you think of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1?
I had a blast with it, Matt. I really enjoyed watching Tom Cruise do his thing, which is to perform death-defying stunts in such a spectacular format, and watching it on the big screen and how it plays out. I saw it in Limax. You saw it in legitimate IMAX, laser IMAX at the Scotiabank Theater. I think the third act specifically is where a lot of the action does take place, and you're left on that kind of high that the adrenaline rush provides. And so with that going into this, I think there is going to be a certain amount of disappointment when it comes to comparing it to something like Fallout, which this movie is a very different film to Fallout, where Fallout I think is just like a nonstop action movie, and even to the point of how it handles exposition on the run. It's literally integrated into the movement of the story and the progression of the story, where here there's more espionage and sort of build up until you get to that third act. Not that there isn't set pieces beforehand. There's a great one in Rome, and there are fun kind of sequences that are
back to Fast X, baby.
I know, and I think we'll talk a lot
the same steps.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk a lot about that as well. Like there's even a sequence where Cruise is in the desert in the Middle East at the beginning, and that very much looks like the sequence from John Wick Chapter 4. So there's a lot of repetition there with recent action cinema, but also I think there's a lot of references to 80s and 90s practical effects and in-camera trickery and things like that. So I mean, there's even a cheesy magic trick with Tom Cruise and Haley Atwell's sort of great sort of expert thief in this airport, and sort of like with this key that almost, you know, is symbolic of religion being a technology, you know, or technology being a religion. And so you have those elements all coming into play. And yeah, it's just kind of more of a fun kind of action throwback. It's not reinventing the wheel. It's not maybe on the level of Fallout, which I think any action movie would be lucky enough to achieve in a franchise or just as an individual film. But as it is, I think it is a very well made um action thriller that plays within the milieu of what you're expecting, and it's very satisfying for those reasons. And I actually do think that there is a bit of covert comedy on Christopher McQuarrie's part, which we'll get into more with the spoilers. But Matt, what did you
Yeah.
think?
I just jumping on your point, you have a really interesting kind of analysis of kind of the meta commentary on the movie that I thought was really interesting, which isn't something that I really clued into as I was watching it, but as I was talking to you after. So we'll save that for the spoiler section. So stick around for that because Eric had a really interesting perspective that I didn't, I guess I didn't see, and then I was kind of arguing back to you going like, I think you're reading into it more than maybe what is given to us. But then as the more I thought about it, I go, no, that probably is what they were kind of trying to do. So I can't wait to talk to you about that. I this is tough because I tweeted this out that I'm like, it's amazing to me that the fifth best Mission Impossible movie can still be one of like the most enjoyable experiences I've had at the movies this year. So that's kind of a double-edged sword where I still had a really good time with this movie. Like when it ended, I was exhilarated. I was excited to see part two. Um, However, there was something about the vibes just being slightly off in this movie where I can't, and I'm excited to go into full spoilers and talk about it all with you because then we can bring up certain specific things and talk about stuff. But I found myself like thinking that this is the weakest of the Christopher McQuarrie trilogy of Mission Impossible movies. And that might come with it being a part one. And, you know, we've talked about this with Dune and Spider-Verse and Fast X, that you're kind of only seeing half the movie and some feel more complete than others. And this does feel like a pretty complete, at least story for the most part of, you know, there's a MacGuffin and that's the part of the first half. And then the MacGuffin's going to be used in the second half, right? That's not a spoiler. That's just, you know, what this movie is. It feels pretty complete in that side of things. But there was something about the spectacle of it all that I've come to love from three onward. And three being what I, going back to Fast and Furious, feels like the Fast Five of the franchise. The thing that kind of, even though we've only, one is still a great movie, two fumbled quite a bit. I mean,
Take a look around,
it's,
man.
yeah, it fumbled. It's still an interesting movie because of, you know, John Woo and things like that, but it's not a great movie. It could have easily killed the franchise. And then you have someone like J.J. Abrams come in and kind of, I think, set off what modern Mission Impossible is. It is still a bit on a smaller scale than maybe what 4, 5, 6 all become and onward. But I really love three because I was a big J.J. Abrams guy at the time because of Lost, and it was his, I think, feature debut, right?
Yep.
Like his, and then Michael Giacchino's score and just kind of that movie with Philip Seymour Hoffman being an excellent kind of, you know, chewing up the scenery villain in that movie, I think is amazing. And so I have a soft spot for three. And then Brad, what I loved about the Mission Impossible movies was that you kind of got a different flavor on each movie, right? Like it
Because
was
of the
still,
director, right?
yes, and that's what I loved about the franchise was that, you know, one feels completely different than two, and two feels completely different than three, and three feels completely different than four, and five, you know, until McQuarrie kind of takes over. And I love Christopher McQuarrie. I think he's done an amazing job with these movies, but I found myself now his third outing, and I just felt like he couldn't one up himself anymore, right? Like I felt like Rogue Nation was awesome because it was different than Ghost Protocol, which was Brad Bird's movie. And then you had Fallout, which felt like this perfect kind of epilogue to, his movie, that, and it just built on that with bringing back the villain and just being this exhilarating, incredible stunt sequences, and like the crazy, you have the bathroom fight, you have the skydiving scene, you have the helicopter sequence. And I just found myself now in this one, um going, I enjoyed it. It almost felt like it was trying to your point of bringing up 80s and 90s movies and spy movies and things like that. Like it almost felt like it was trying to be the first movie again. Like it's still big and on a giant scale, but I think it is still toned down a little bit when it comes to the big action set pieces and stunts and things like that. Like there was never once where I was like, holy shit, like this is exhilarating, like, or like you felt like Tom Cruise was in danger or anything like that. Even the big, again, not a spoiler because everyone probably seen this a million times. We'll get into spoilers in a sec, but that jump that they've been, off the cliff that they've been promoting for a year now, just never felt like it was that crazy. And like, I was engaged the whole time. I thought it was silly. I thought it was like Mission Impossible by the way of Metal Gear. And like it had a lot of Kojima Metal Gear stuff in it, which is interesting because Kojima takes a lot from spy movies and things like that. So it's this weird, like he took from spy movies. Now this feels like Metal Gear with the villain
Well,
and
even the title,
eye
right? Like that
patches and
is
like
a
a
video game
Metal Gear
title.
ass title. Yeah. Like it
Yeah.
definitely is. You could see Metal Gear Solid Dead Reckoning. Like it fits right there, right? So like there is a lot to really like in the movie, but and I still found myself like enjoying it throughout. And I still would take this over most action movies and most action franchises. And I think it's just a testament to how much I really love this franchise that I can be slightly disappointed with this movie, but still really like it. and and for what it is, and being a part one of two, like again, maybe I'll rejudge it after I see part two and view it as a 6-hour movie, right? Or something like that. Like, movies keep getting longer and longer to the point where a 3-hour movie is only half of a movie now, right? And it's just that can get exhausting. And at times this movie does feel exhausting, but I just never felt that sense of like, I don't know, wonder or exhilaration or however you want to put it, that I had in both Rogue Nation and Fallout. Like I I like Hayley Atwell. I think she's a great addition. This is the most I've maybe ever liked her in something, and I thought she holds her own. But like, but to that point, when you introduce someone new, some people take a back seat, right? Like I felt Rebecca Ferguson was kind of underutilized in the movie, and I think the villain in the movie, or the henchman of the villain, who is the villain, we'll get into that in a sec, is kind of boring. I don't know, he's just kind of nothing, and I thought it was a weird choice how they handled his backstory, which we'll get into too.
Well,
But I
that's
mean,
also
well,
just to cut you out there just for a second.
yeah,
That's also going to be interesting to discuss based on what the original casting was too, I
yes,
think.
I know. So anyways, I slightly disappointed, but still really liked it. So I will give our ratings now. I'm going to give the movie a 4 out of 5. I still think it's like really enjoyable. And I think if you like this franchise, you'll like this movie. You might be a little bit more on my side of going like, okay, I didn't like it as much as the last two McQuarrie movies. And to me, I like Ghost Protocol and 3 even better than this one. But that's also close. Like those are all 4-star and above movies to me. So they're 4, 4.5, or 5, all of those movies to me. So this is one of my favorite action franchises, and it's just fun. Like the spy stuff in this movie is fun. It's silly, like you said, like it's, I think, intentionally funny at times, and then its commentary can be kind of campy and in your face and
Or taking
come,
off your
yeah,
face.
yeah, exactly. So like I still had a really good time seeing Henry Czerny come back, and like um other things like that. I really do think they were trying to invoke some vibes of that first movie, the Dutch angles, Eric.
Oh yeah.
The kind of in-camera tricks that you're mentioning. Like I really do feel like they were like, all right, let's bring this back to the first movie a little bit, but we're going to bring these very modern uh topical things and kind of make this weird mishmash of an old school Mission Impossible movie with the modern stuff. And It didn't all work for me, but still had a great time. So 4 out of 5 for me.
Yeah, you know what? There's something as well that you touched on that I quickly want to mention as well. And we were talking about, and you brought it up originally. So, um, the idea of films extending their shelf life with multiple sequels that are part ones. You're seeing this, I think, specifically because of the Marvel output with Infinity War and um Endgame, and it's that televisual thing. Television is trying to be more like film, and film now is trying to be more like uh television, where you're
Episodic
blurring, yeah,
and
you're blurring those lines together. And even just, I think it's interesting just of the casting of Haley Atwell and Palm Clementif and even Henry Cavill in the last movie, where you have three actors that are known before this for superhero franchises
yeah.
coming into this kind of film and being used in a way that is still familiar to audiences in an action milieu, but at the same time, I think gives them a lot more to do, just in terms of their physicality, but also even in their presence, that makes them more memorable. Palm Clementif doesn't have a lot to say dialogue wise, but she is a very strong presence
Yeah, she
in
reminds me of
certain
Dave Bautista in
Spectre.
Spectre.
But that's like the classic Bond thing as well,
That's
where
what I
like
mean.
the
Yeah.
Bond henchman sometimes is even better than the actual villain. And
And I think
so
she's better than this villain, right? Like,
I don't disagree with you, although I really do like Isai Morales as an actor, and I think there's an interesting thing going on there that we'll get into more in spoilers. But yeah, when you're watching this, I think you're just kind of enjoying it as it is,
yeah,
and like that comparison. And I think we should do maybe some rankings in the
sure.
spoilers. But I think that's an interesting aspect to consider as well. You're comparing this movie against the other films, but you're also comparing it to the landscape of blockbuster cinema, especially what's going on right now. There are elements in this movie that feel like we've come across before, with talking about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, or Transformers,
Oh
and
yeah.
the Rise of
The
the Beast.
double-sided MacGuffin is definitely the
Exactly,
summer of the
connecting
double.
connecting two things, but in order to do so, you have to go globetrotting across the world in order to get to the other piece and fill the movie with maybe unnecessary exposition
I'll
that
have a
is
double MacGuffin
convoluted.
combo with a hash brown and a large
That would
iced
be
coffee.
incredible. They should do that. So I think like there are elements there where like you're even just comparing it to what we've recently gotten in the live action format. I think the
Yeah.
best summer movie so far that we have is Across the Spider-Verse. The best live action blockbuster is Mission Impossible. But again, like it's one of those things. I really like. I'm just, this is a long-winded thing. I'm giving it the same rating that you did, but I really did like
It's
the
that, and that's
movie.
what's interesting, right? Because like
Yeah,
I'm slightly disappointed, but gave it a 4, and you really liked it and gave it a 4. So
but
like,
it's not
I
John
think that's
Wick Chapter 4, where like as soon as I finished watching that movie the first time, I was like,
yeah.
I need to see this again. You
Which
know,
is so interesting because I didn't have that reaction to John Wick. I came at it much later, right? Because of my panic attack in the middle of the movie the first time, and then that's a long story. I'll eventually get to that on when we get back to the main show. But I didn't have that reaction. Like I like this more than John Wick, but I also gave John Wick Chapter 4 a 4. So like
but you liked past John Wick movies, I think, though,
yeah.
as well, a little bit more, right? Where I have been on kind of the mixed negative on that franchise until this movie, where I felt like everything that I was looking for in a John Wick movie, in the same way that, there are things I look for in a Mission Impossible film, came together in a way that was the perfect representation of what the filmmakers were trying to do all along, and they got it
Yeah,
perfectly right. And also just like, again, like talking about similarities in recent blockbusters, the third act of John Wick Chapter 4 is the strongest aspect of it, with
sure.
even the video game component of
Oh
the
yeah.
Hotline Miami stuff coming in
Hey,
into
we keep
question.
bringing up video games, and you said they're taking blockbusters are taking from television, and I mean, ironically, this is based off of a TV show, so we shouldn't be
Yeah.
too surprised. But taking from video games as well, and video games, ironically, becoming more cinematic, right? So it's just like this weird kind of mishmash of all this hashtag content, now all kind of being this kind of all taking from each other and all feeling like one another. It becomes kind of difficult to differentiate. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but like I find myself watching a lot of
It
TV,
blurs
but
the
I go back,
line,
yeah, it
right?
blurs the lines, yeah, between it. And
Yeah.
so yeah, so we both give the movie a 4. Please stick around. We're gonna do a spoiler cast in 3, 2, 1. All right, let's get right into spoilers. I don't know
Han
if we want to
Solo
just start.
dies.
God damn it, that'll be every time we do a spoiler cast. Um, I don't know where you want to start. We can kind of go through, but we can elaborate on certain things.
Yeah.
I want to kick it off with maybe what you said, and going over what you thought some of the themes of the movie and what they were trying to say. So, okay, now that we're into spoilers, the villain is called the Entity. It is an AI. I don't even know if that's a spoiler, but they
It's
didn't
not
really
really. It's been
but they
talked
didn't
about in
really
reviews and things
yeah, and I
like
don't
that.
think in the
So
trailers they really kind of allude to that. They show you more the human element to it with
Gabriel, yeah.
Gabriel. Justice for Gabriel again. So here's the thing. The AI thing, super silly, but very topical, right? With everything that's going on with AI and Chat GPT and AI art and all this kind of stuff right now. So they're definitely, had their, thinking 3 steps ahead, because making this movie a couple years ago. But I mean, AI and has been a thing forever in movies, as being like a thing that might destroy us all one day, right?
Well,
So
like the
that
Terminator movies, right? Like
yeah,
James Cameron
exactly.
was looking at that with Skynet. Like it's something that audiences, even though technology is always updating and getting faster and faster, it is something that I think people have been self-aware with, even going further back to, films in the 70s and like the Colossus project and things like that. So it's always been there, but I think even more recently, as you mentioned, with like the current climate of even looking at the writers strike and how some studio executives and people feel like, oh, well, we can just replace writers with AI robots and they can, write a script or come together and put something together, and everything's dictated by algorithms or
Yeah.
algorithm in Space Jam Legacy.
And
So
even to your point of just blockbuster cinema in general, feeling like it's
the
the
same.
same each movie, right? It's following a formula, an algorithm that goes, this is what people want out of out of blockbuster action kind of cinema, whether it's superhero movies or otherwise, where it does feel like, this movie shooting a lot of stuff practically, not everything. There's obviously some CG in the movie, the whole train sequence at the end and stuff like that. But um, you brought up an interesting point of this movie with its kind of references to those movies from the 80s and 90s and before, and kind of how it tackles AI and Tom Cruise's stance on it's the cinema and the state of cinema, and that wanting to do all this stuff practically and his own stunts and all this stuff, and that AI and computer generated stuff is kind of going to be the death of cinema, and using that as a villain in this movie, I think, is kind of interesting. It's something that I didn't really latch on to while watching it, though. So I don't know if you want to go into that a little bit more.
Yeah, it's that classic thing of man versus machine, or as in my Rogers review I mentioned, it's man versus stunt man versus machine in a
Yeah.
way, and it's like one against, the impossible, and going against something that can predict, 3 or 4 steps ahead of you what is going to happen, and the logic of like, oh, is the individual able to compete against something that is programmed. And when you're watching, like, even the opening scene, Dead Reckoning is referencing, this submersed submarine, and when you're watching that sequence, one of the first things you'll notice is that the language translation goes from Russian to English in the same way that the Hunt for the Red October does. And Christopher McQuarrie
And
did that
Avatar
even
2, The Way of
Avat-
Water.
yes, but even in Valkyrie, which Christopher McQuarrie is a writer on, when you see
Did
the
that too,
beginning,
or
at the beginning of that movie, you see Tom Cruise's character writing in German and speaking in German, but then the text changes into English. So
yeah.
it's a quick way of kind of, and it's a very clever conceit to get that language barrier to flip into English from another language. And so when you're watching that, you're thinking to yourself, oh, okay, like, also the Jack Ryan series is a very classic, 80s, 90s muscular cinema macho kind of thing with, that first movie with Sean Connery and Alec Baldwin. So there's that. And then you do even start noticing that, oh, they are implementing more of the, the canted Dutch angles.
Oh
And
yeah.
it works quite well for a sequence like that, because I think, when you're kind of playing with the laws of physics and gravity in a submersible, you can kind of use that in an interesting way. And so as that progresses, you start to see, oh, okay, well, there is a reference there, because I mean, McQuarrie is a pretty smart filmmaker. He knows what he's talking about. And then when we're first introduced to Kittredge, played by Henry Czerny, in the first time we physically see him, and he's with the community, which I really like the idea of that as well,
I'm
like
going to the
a,
bathroom. Keep
a
talking.
group of people kind of working together to put down one person, and that conspiracy theory kind of play. It has a similarity to something like the X-Files, where Mulder is against his own organization that's hiring him, or telling him to work this way and not to really look into anything. And it, again, one against the impossible odds. And then even within that scene, when it's revealed that Ethan is in the room with the community watching, and he basically knocks out everybody with gas, um not his gas, but like the actual like knockout gas. Like, that scene plays very much like Batman 89, where you have the Joker coming into the art gallery and knocking out everybody, well, killing everybody with his poisonous gas, but then also giving Vicky Vale
A gas
a
mask.
gas mask in the way that Kittredge is given that. And then that conversation and where that
It's
goes.
a cool ass scene though. Like that's the stuff that did remind me of Metal Gear again. Like of like
Yeah.
cool design of the big gas mask, cool design of. I didn't expect that to be Ethan in like another mask thing, which you should at this point think everyone's in a mask or something. But
We all wear
um,
masks, metaphorically speaking,
yeah,
and
but
literally.
cool ass scene though.
Yeah, and then throughout the movie, like we talked about this in the spoiler free part, where I think the whole last act is referencing the first Mission Impossible movie as
Yeah,
well,
with the
being
train
on the train,
sequence. Yeah,
and even having Vanessa Kirby as
be
the
the
daughter of
daughter of.
Max, played
Yeah,
by Vanessa Redgrave, coming in and having a conversation on the train, but not with Ethan this time around, but with Kittredge. I think like that's kind of interesting as well. And even
even
the
bringing him back is a. I mean, a
yeah,
direct kind of. Yeah.
yeah, it is a direct nod, and he's great in the movie. Like, I really do think
Check
that
out
he's
Eric's interview with him.
with Henry Czerny. It's 3.5 minutes long, but it was a lot of fun talking to him. But you watch a scene like that play out in that gas mask scene, and then you start to realize, okay, they are referencing certain aspects. And then there's this whole party sequence in Rome, where the reveal that the entity is among them, and the entity actually, I actually like the music cue from Lauren Balfe for the entity quite a bit.
Lauren Balf's great, man. Yeah.
Yeah, but what I think is also interesting there is the way that the entity looks as like an eye, and
Mhm.
it's blue, is the same way that Sauron,
Yeah.
the in Lord of the Rings, is presented, and Saruman is the extension, the physical
Huh.
extension
Huh.
of Sauron, doing the groundwork, the dirty work
Dropping
for
some
him.
Lord of the Rings references on
So
Mission Impossible. Love it.
Esai Morales is almost Christopher Lee in
Yeah.
this story. He's the one that's kind of doing the work for him. And while I don't know if it's necessarily a great performance, what I do like about his delivery of his dialogue is it does kind of have that arch stilted kind of mannerism of like how a computer might talk. So it's almost like he's being possessed by the computer and is a
Yeah.
physical manifestation. If Ethan is the living, manifestation
Manifestation of
of
destiny.
destiny, he's
Yeah.
the living manifestation of chaos through the computer.
Yeah.
The ghost in the
Some
machine.
might say robotic and kind of boring, but
Yeah, but I think that like that's even an interesting conversation to have, is that Isai Morales was originally like he was brought in after the fact because it was Nicholas Hoult that was going to be
yeah.
that performance, and
So
that
here's the
character
thing.
had to
Can
have
I
been
jump in?
rewritten. Yeah, please do.
Can I jump in? I
Yes.
feel like another reason why I don't love Gabriel as the villain is because I was saying this to Nevis after our screening. Nevis didn't really like this movie. She thought it was kind of boring until the last act, which is surprising. She really loves these movies as well. She's been the most against this movie I've talked to anyone about.
She's raging against the machine the way Ethan is.
But something we both said about Gabriel is like the whole backstory of being a ghost from Ethan's past kind of thing and showing this kind of de-aged old footage, but like always felt strange. And I think that's what we're going to bring up when we're talking about the Nicholas Hoult thing, because the age stuff wouldn't add up. They'd
Work.
have to kind of change that because he's too young to be someone from his past 30 years ago or whatever, unless he's a baby. Like, just
Baby murder.
Yeah, he's I don't Nicholas Holt's got to be around our age, so he's probably like 5 years old at the time, like the 30-year flashback. But that part, like to me, I'm like, why wouldn't you have? They brought back Henry Czerny. They're kind of bringing back or like paying homage to the first film and stuff. I would have preferred that character to be actually someone we've seen before, because like all of that kind of stuff just feels like I don't care as much, right? When they're going, oh, it's a ghost from your past. It's like, I don't know who the fuck this guy is. Like, he's like, oh, he just wants pain. He doesn't care about killing you. He just wants you to suffer. And I'm like, I don't know if I believe that either. I'm like, I don't see that through this movie and this history that you have with Ethan. Like, I would argue one way, okay, like that's just kind of how these movies are. Sometimes you introduce a new character that has a backstory that Ethan knew in his past or something like that, which is like even the retcon of Vanessa Kirby's character being the daughter of Max and stuff like that. And like, I guess not even a retcon, because that would happen. Would she have been born before or after? Probably before. So anyways, that is a retcon a little bit, but like, you know what I mean by like almost flashing back to scenes that looked like they should be taking place in the first movie, that like I just wish it was someone from Ethan's past that we knew about, and that just took away from him a little bit more with that backstory to me. And then going to the Nicholas Hoult thing, like I would have actually like I like Nicholas Hoult as an actor, and I would have been interested in him in this, and nothing against this guy. But it would have been interesting because I would have liked to see how they would have changed that. So yeah, I just don't think it would have fit though. But I don't know what they would have done.
Well, that's also the other thing that I think is interesting in the casting of Isai Morales is that this doesn't change the movie, and I do agree with you where like I think it would have been better if they somehow brought back John Voight or
Oh yeah,
Emilio Estevez survived
Emilio Estevez.
the elevator death.
I don't know, maybe not Emilio, but like,
but yeah, like somebody that has been in the franchise.
But imagine Emilio Estevez with like half his face caved in or something, right? Like he got stabbed by the elevator,
or he's wearing a hockey mask, a Mighty Ducks hockey mask.
Yeah.
But with Morales, I think there is something there, going to my theory about like an homage to 80s action movies and 80s cinema and that practical way of doing things. Morales has been around since the early 80s. He kind of came up at the same time as Sean Penn. They were both in a movie called Bad Boys, not to be confused with the Brockheimer, Will Smith, Martin Lawrence movie, but a juvenile delinquent in prison film with Sean Penn. And Penn was the one that kind of broke out in that movie. And Morales, even though his performance is praised and he's done a lot of stuff, like you look at his career, he's been consistently working since the 80s and mostly doing TV and guest spots and things like that. But he's done a lot of, he's worked with Stuart Gordon and people like that. But it kind of makes sense because it does feel like, oh, like Cruise kind of came into prominence also in the 80s and rose to the ranks of movie star with Top Gun, so in Risky Business. But it makes sense on just in terms of like an age thing, but it's also really fascinating to think like he was also Morales was also recently in Paul Schrader's Master Gardener, and he plays sort of the handler for Joel Edgerton's character in that. And there are also flashbacks in that movie to when he's younger, dealing with Edgerton's Proud Boy character. And so I thought that was kind of just interesting, and not a it doesn't matter to the movie, but just as almost like a trivial kind of factoid
Yeah.
that kind of comes afterwards. But yeah, when you're watching these sequences, it becomes almost noticeable that Macquarie is having fun, not only with the dialogue. There is some jokes that I think work with like what the organization is, what an IMF agent is, and like the
Yeah.
references like, oh, is it a bank or something like that? And it's like, no, it's the other one.
The Impossible Mission Force.
Yeah, and so like those are fun, but then when you see that sequence of the big reveal that at that party where everything is in a canted angle at that point, and the entity is in the room with you, I think there is kind of a self-aware metatextual humor involved. I don't know if Tom Cruise is in on the joke,
Yeah.
but Macquarie does have a satirical, cynical flavor to his writing, and even in The Way of the Gun, the opening sequence is this violent kind of absurdist fight sequence between Ryan Philippe and Benicio del Toro, and this kind of macho guy who kind of oversteps his line. And Sarah Silverman's in that scene as well, in one of her first movies. So like, just like there, I think there is intent there. I don't know how much there is, but I think there is references to cinema's past and saying like, look how much better this is when done
Right.
by people in camera working together on something. And even the name Gabriel, being biblical or religious, and the angel serving a god, and this god being the god of technology, and again the MacGuffin being a cross, to bear, for people to
Yeah.
bear, whoever holds it. Those things I think are intentional, and with that, like, I think it makes you appreciate this movie a little bit more, and just the writing and direction, than maybe just a simple action movie. But Fallout is Macquarie's pinnacle, and I
Yeah.
don't think he or anybody will be able to reach that height.
I
You know,
think I totally understand where you're coming from with that analysis of the movie, and I thought it was kind of an interesting take, because I guess I'm going into Mission Impossible movies not for that. Does that make sense? Like
I get
I'm
you're
not
going in
not
for
looking
fun.
yeah,
Yeah,
and the spectacle, right? And
yeah,
like the goofiness and the fun, and like the crazy ass stunts where I go, "Oh my god, he did jump out of that fucking plane and his suit looks awesome." And then like or he is fucking flying that helicopter, or he is climbing on the side of the Burj Khalifa, or he did hold his breath for 7 minutes or whatever. Or he did, and those are the moments that I'm remembering from these movies, right? Is like the crazy spectacle of it all. And that's not to say that, yeah, okay, there can't be meta commentary or social commentary or nods to old movies. And it seems like, it's intentional that they wanted to make a different movie than the last two, right? They wanted to make something maybe more akin to the first one. And that's fine, but maybe it's like how my brain was trained at this point. And again, I'm sounding like I'm more negative on the movie than I am, but I'm just kind of playing devil's
no,
advocate as
you're being
well. But
critical of
like,
something that you genuinely like. But
yeah,
I think like that's a good thing, because again, you can be positive about something that you don't like, and you can be
yeah.
negative about
And
something that you do.
yeah, and I go in for the fun and the spectacle, and I like the goofiness of the villain. It does feel very Kojima, like, the AI is taking over the world. It's in the government, and it's gonna, all of that is cool. There's eye patches, there's green gas, there's all this kind of stuff that looks cool. But then, like, it was shrouded with a lot of exposition, and I felt a little clunky dialogue, in the sense of like, overly trying, I don't know, explaining what's trying to happen or why this AI is so bad. And like the spycraft of it all can be fun, but then it can kind of be like a lot at times. And then like, again, I think back at the other Mission Impossible movies of the plots, and I'm like, okay, it's usually like this nuclear bomb might blow up the world, right? And you got to stop it. And that's pretty much the extent of it. Or you save someone you love, your friends, your wife, whoever, as they went on. But it's something about this AI, and I guess it's something, yeah, we've seen in Terminator. I mean, even going back to Fast and Furious, wasn't this the plot of Hobbs and Shaw as well?
Well, yeah,
Like, or
and I mean the
sort of
biggest duh that I can't
like,
believe I didn't mention was
yeah.
Hal from 2001.
Yeah, well, of course, yes. So, it's been a trope in movies for a very, very, very long time. So I guess it maybe wasn't. I guess because it's more topical because of what's going on with AI right now, it feels more relevant and feels very of today. But then sometimes the dialogue would be goofy or silly in the sense of like the way that they talk about it. It never like hit as hard as I like. If they wanted that meta commentary to come through. I don't know if I ever took it seriously enough, or maybe or I wasn't. I was looking for fun, and then they were trying to give me something else. And maybe on a rewatch, I would appreciate that a little bit more. But I go back to like the big set pieces to kind of transition into something else where I brought up already 5 or 6 from other movies that were very memorable to me. Where in this movie, the big one we can talk about first is that sequence where Ethan drives his motorbike off the cliff and parachutes into the train. And they overshowed us in all of the marketing, and maybe that's our fault because part of our job is to pay attention to, trailers and production stuff and like, but I feel like that was shoved down our throats so much of being like, look at this crazy fucking stunt that Tom Cruise did for this movie. And I'm like, is that any crazier than some of the other things he's done? Like he hung off the side of a goddamn airplane as it took off and landed. He's climbed the Burj Khalifa. He jumped out of an airplane free dove off of it. Where it just never felt like that impressive, and that's crazy to say because it's still insane and it's still he's doing it. But like it felt all underwhelming, and I know they've talked about where that was the first thing they shot on the movie, and they're like, in case I died, I wanted it to be the thing they could have like, which is funny. And
God.
he is an insane person, and I appreciate how insane he is and the commitment to doing everything himself. But they did also talk about being like, when we shot that, we didn't know what it was going to be in the movie. Like we just shot it and we were like, well, how do we get there? And we'll figure that part out. It feels like that when I'm watching it. Like it felt like they didn't know what they wanted that stunt to be, but they needed this big thing to be in the movie. And it just didn't feel like it held up. And I should judge the movie on its own. And I said it's an enjoyable movie, but when it's part of a franchise that has all these iconic moments and you go for the spectacle and you go for Tom Cruise doing crazy stunts, like I am going to compare it to what I liked in the other movies or what is memorable to me. And that stunt is just not going to be that. And then when you go back to the other action sequences, they're entertaining and engaging. Like I said, like the airport sequence when you find out Hayley Atwell's like master thief is kind of going through, and it's an introduction to her character. And I always like Ethan kind of tracking someone and running and getting away from people. Like all that spy stuff is fun, but in the end I don't know if I'm going to remember that when it comes to the bathroom sequence in Fallout, and which I'll keep referencing, is incredible. And some of those action sequences, like I think coming off of Fast X, which you have an unhinged Jason Momoa going through Rome and driving a giant like Looney Tunes ass fucking ball through the streets of Rome, bomb.
The
And
Oppenheimer
then
bomb.
you have kind of a Looney Tunes esque kind of sequence in this with this Fiat. It's just in the exact same kind of thing with cars driving down the steps in Rome and in the same places and stuff like that. And that's just unfortunate timing. They both scripted a scene in Rome. It's a beautiful city and it's an awesome place to drive cars down amazing historic steps and stuff like that. But like I just saw it done in Fast X, and Fast X was that over the top kind of ridiculousness where I just felt underwhelmed again by that in this. And I didn't feel like the comedy really worked in that sequence. Like the intentional comedy in that
Yeah.
sequence just never really clicked for me. What else do I want to talk about? Like there were cool things. Like I love
Can I jump
Rebecca.
on something that you
Yeah,
mentioned
please
there?
do. Yeah,
Because I
yeah.
think like it's important to talk about
At any
the
point, jump
stunts.
in.
The stunts are the showcase of these movies. And I don't disagree with you in the way that we were talking before about like if you're looking at that Norwegian, you know, motorbike jump,
Yeah.
I think it is disappointing in the sense when you look at it in the picture of the ranking of these movies within the franchise itself. But when you're looking at it from the perspective of it being an action movie,
Oh,
I think it
totally.
is very satisfying, because I've been listening to the Video Archives Quentin Tarantino Roger Avery podcast recently, and they were talking about with Moonraker. Moonraker is not a great movie, but the thing that you miss about a lot of these movies is that it is an actual physical person doing these stunts instead of
Driving a motorbike off a cliff, right?
instead of a
a guy with
CGI
ropes on or strings on him with a green screen in the
yeah,
background.
or a
Right?
CGI body falling,
That's true
like,
too. Yeah.
and I think, like, I do agree with you where, structurally, Macquarie is one of those individuals who he's talked about it with Fallout, where they'll find an interesting location and then they'll write something around the location, and then
Which
they'll
I'm fine for
and that's
or
what the
fine
Mission
with.
Impossible movies have always kind of done. Like, even Brian De Palma talked about how they would create a scene or a stunt first and then write the movie or
And
the
that's
rest of the
great.
sequence around it. So I think where the one sort of intentional comedic beat works really well, that is intentional in that sequence, is when Cruise interrupts or crashes into the cart, into the train. That
Ridiculous,
is
but funny.
amazing. That
Yeah,
is a
yeah.
very funny beat. But I also agree with you where the stuff in Rome, even though it's impressive to see, each actor drive, with one hand handcuffed to the other person, that is great. And I think it again is mostly all practical effects. So you feel like you are in the moment with these people, where watching a CGI bomb roll down the streets isn't as you're taken out of it because of the artifice, but you do feel that kind of similarity of having just watched Fast X, and you're kind of like, maybe I would appreciate this more if I hadn't seen this, and maybe I will appreciate it more after watching
Yeah.
part two, and looking at it as a whole picture of what they're doing. And I think another aspect of kind of being underwhelmed by that stunt that they're selling is because of the delay. I think, and that's nobody's fault. It's just the pandemic was happening, and
Where we
like
saw it 2 years ago almost, right? Or
yeah,
whatever.
and so
Yeah.
we've had that image in our head, and,
So
we're
hype it
thinking,
up. We're hyping it up
so we're
almost, right?
building it in our own minds. Is like, okay, well, if they're showing us this now, this must be like,
You're waiting the whole movie for it to happen, right?
yeah,
And then when it happens, you go, "Oh, okay." Like, and
exactly.
and it's still very impressive. I agree with you. Like, I'm never gonna do that. I would never even dream of doing that. I would, in my nightmares, wouldn't do that. Like, so I appreciate the commitment. Like I said, it's just in a franchise that has so many amazing stunts and moments. When this movie builds up to, like, everything before that, the airport sequence, the desert sequence, the Rome sequence, the bridge sequence, where they kill off Rebecca Ferguson, and like,
Spoiler.
um, we're in the spoiler
I
cast,
know.
man. So like, and that's what I want to talk about next. But it just felt a little underwhelming. However, before we move on to Rebecca Ferguson and other things, I will say the last act, even though it obviously isn't practical in a sense, I'm sure it is a little bit, but with the train sequence, right? Being an homage to the first movie, but then that sequence, which is very silly, but is still very thrilling and engaging, is when they're trying to jump from train car to train car as it's kind of going over the cliff. Like, that is a really good sequence, and that whole last act on the train, I think, is awesome, and I think it's executed very, very well. And even if it's the most quote unquote fake, like, I think they were on a train on the top for a lot of that,
Yeah.
but when it comes to them climbing and running and jumping, I'm sure that's all done in a studio or something like that. Who knows? But I don't know exactly. But I really like that last act on the train. So I will say, like, that was thrilling to me, and that was unexpected, I guess, where I was waiting for the cliff jump on the dirt bike, but the train sequence, I guess, because I hadn't seen much from that was kind of exhilarating to me. So I will say, before, do you have anything on the last act there, or the action sequences in
Yeah,
general?
I just want to quickly mention another reference. I think that there is some intention there, or maybe there isn't, but you can kind of put some sort of reference to, is the Shea Wiggum character kind of being the one who's chasing Ethan down, and that is very similar
Also
to
a Fast and Furious reference.
Well, he's in the Fast
I
movies,
that's what
right?
I was saying. I was like, I'm
You
joking,
know,
but
but also he's very much like Tommy Lee Jones in The Fugitive,
yeah,
chasing after Harrison Ford, where at the beginning of it, it's just his job to do this and catch this guy and bring him in. But then as the story
he
progresses,
sees his
he
side.
he's a little bit more conflicted, especially in that final sequence where he realizes, okay, well, I need to let this guy go because he's got a job to do, or he's not, as he's been betrayed by, the higher ups. And Shea Wiggum is amazing in this movie. Every time, like, there's
I love
one
Shea
look
Wiggum, yeah.
in particular, and he's having a great summer as well
The
with
summer of Shea,
Spider-Verse.
man. The summer
Yeah.
of Shea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
No shade on Shay. He's wonderful, and great hair in this too. But there's
yeah.
one look when like Cruz is escaping via parachute at the end, and he's like outside of the cart, and he kind of gives this look where he's like,
What the
and
fuck?
it's amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
He's so much fun in everything he's in.
Yeah.
And such an
I
interesting
agree.
year for him because of even with Eileen as well, with Anne
Oh
Hathaway.
yeah.
Like,
Which he's good in that as well.
yeah, solid character actor, always good.
Yeah,
So like I think
totally.
like that is another reference to like Andrew Davis as an action filmmaker,
Totally.
I think that there's a lot going on there, and I think going into the conversation that we're going to have next is really important, not just because of Rebecca Ferguson dying, but I think we should also talk about the relationship women have to Ethan Hunt in these movies. I think that that's where my biggest negative lies,
Interesting.
because you
Yeah.
have these very progressive, independent, complex female roles, but they're only that way until they need to either be saved or in the debt of Ethan Hunt in some way or
You're
another.
not wrong. I definitely understand that. Quickly before we get to that, Carrie Elways. There's something about this guy. Like I love Carrie Elways sometimes. Dr. Lawrence Gordon in the Saw movies. God bless him. But you can tell that this man acted in a Saw movie. And like I just like and Carrie Elways, a cinema legend almost. But I just found that as we get later into Carrie Elwes's career, every time I see him, I'm like, there's something off about your delivery. And it's always this, you want like it. I don't even know how to say it perfectly, but I did not find Carrie Elwes good in this movie. And I'm finding more and more often that whenever I see him in something, I'm like, I don't know if you're a great actor, man.
No, he's very good and well cast in The Princess Bride.
Yeah.
And like
And I
as
think
Wesley,
that's why,
he's
like, I think his whole, I'm like, he'll be a cinema legend just for Princess Bride, but I'm
yeah.
like, I don't know if anything after
I,
that.
I think we can sum it up
Twister.
best. We could, God, Twister, he gets killed horribly in that movie. um, I think we can best sum it up this way: Wiggum forever, Elways never.
Perfect. That's all I wanted to say. I just found like every time, even in Blackberry earlier this year, and like he kind of works in Blackberry
Oh,
because
because he's scum. He's
yeah,
scum in that.
and Matt Johnson's style is a little like over the top. That I think he kind of works in that, but like and in Saw, like he's awful in the first Saw movie, and he's awful when he comes back. But like it fits those movies because those movies are trashy and awful. But like, um yeah, anyways, I wanted a special shout out to I did not think Carrie Elwes was good in this movie.
It's also just
Um
disappointing thinking about like when we're introduced to him with the Community, all the other actors in that scene that could have had that role.
Rob
Like
Delaney.
yeah, again, Fast, right, with Hobbs and Shaw.
Yeah.
So like it's interesting there where you have like a lot of people that
I
are
think
really
that's
good
just the state
actors.
of blockbuster filmmaking. It's the same kind of group of actors that are all trading off franchises. But okay, let's get into I already brought up how I did not love Ilsa
Faust.
Faust in this movie, or nothing against Rebecca Ferguson or the character even, because I really love the character, and she was so amazing in the last in introduced in Rogue Nation and in Fallout, that I felt like, she's just so underused in this movie and then kind of fridged, and I just don't I just don't love.
Literally, she's now her body's in a fridge
Yeah,
probably somewhere.
exactly. Yeah, that's what I mean. By like, I feel like I'm fine with killing off main characters. I'm fine with it. I'm not have any sense of like, well, no, I have an attachment to this character. You can't kill them off, or you can't make Luke a grumpy old man, or any of this shit. Like, it's
He
their
can't throw his
character.
saber away.
It's like it's their character, right? Like, it's not mine. So I'm open to whatever they do with it. I just feel like she's done a little bit dirty in the movie, and I just feel like uh unnecessary and just underused. I don't know, but that's me.
No, I think I think that's a fair criticism, because she was such an important aspect of those last couple of movies and made such an indelible mark on the franchise as Ilsa. And
Yeah, like,
she is
the
such
opera
a
sequence in the Rogue Nation,
in
that
Rogue
one
Nation,
is
yeah,
so
yeah.
good, man.
She's just like an amazing presence. Like, I think like she's one of those actors that just like has something kind of that's both sinister but seductive, but then also like she has her own way of thinking, and like you could just follow her character as much as you could follow Ethan or anybody else. But I think a big problem with this movie as well, and why like I felt similar to how you do, is that in these movies they are also setting up something that doesn't work, which is a relationship, a romantic relationship between Ethan and Ilsa. And with that, I think we've talked about this before with even like Top Gun Maverick, but Tom Cruise doesn't really have any chemistry with any of the leading ladies in any of
Yeah.
these movies, and that's why Mission Impossible 3 doesn't work for me, because I don't buy into the Michelle Monaghan.
See, the Monaghan stuff is the only one that I bought into.
I don't like, I think there's no chemistry, there's no love there. And I think the other problem with that movie, and with these films in general, these characters don't have any lives outside of the action. I don't really care about their their exterior lives, their
Well, at
9
this
to
point,
5s.
they don't have any lives,
And that's
right?
why I like that about Fallout, about Rogue Nation, and this to a degree, is that it's being kept within the lines of their job is their life, because that's all they have.
It has to be now, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
But I do think, like, again, it is weird as well, where you have like almost a little bit of like a romantic kind of angle with even Hayley Atwell that kind of feels a little,
all feels unnecessary all the time, right? Yeah.
off-putting in that way. And like, it's like, oh, you're just trading one woman in for another, and it's just like, come on, guys, like, why can't it just all be platonic and about the action? But you're also selling sex appeal. But again, Cruise doesn't have that.
But that's probably
Schwarzenegger,
something...
Jackie Chan, Cruise, great action stars. They're not good with the romantic aspect. They never will be.
So why put it in, right? But he's a producer. It says a Tom Cruise production at the beginning of the movie, right? So like, I think that's probably something he thinks he is a part of his allure and stuff like that too. But like, he probably still envisions himself as this kind of like, I guess, with sex appeal. But like, I don't see it either. Like, again, the Michelle Monaghan one, I guess I bought into because I know you said you didn't care about their like 9 to 5s and stuff like that, but at that point we still had a little bit of Ethan's like, personal life, and like, so building that up a little bit, even if it's just minorly built up into that movie, and then the personal connection with that whole film and Philip Seymour Hoffman's character and stuff like that, like, I bought into that more. Or else I wish he just respected them as like equals, right? Like both Hayley Atwell and Rebecca Ferguson's character, and even Vanessa Kirby. It's not that he doesn't respect them as equals when it comes to their talent in spycraft or thievery or black market arms dealing. Like he respects them all, but there also is this kind of like, it's that thing now where this movie wants to be very modern but retro, I guess too. But like, I'm like, bro, you don't need to hit on everyone either, or you don't have to like kind of,
or you don't have to make them fall for you.
Yeah,
and
like,
that's also on Christopher McQuarrie as much as it is
totally
on Tom Cruise.
And I'm not someone like, I also, to play the opposite side of it, because people, I think it's a conversation we're seeing a lot. Like, I think sex and sex scenes and sensuality and romantic stuff is all fair game in all of these movies, but you need to make sure that it, one, works, and two, serves the movie in some sort of way, right? Where if it's just there and you're not adding to anything from it, like then why bother? Or if your leads don't have that chemistry, or like, we, again, going back to Fast and Furious, Vin Diesel and Tom Cruise, just like,
they're parallel lives.
Yeah.
They're so close to intersecting, but
Yeah.
one of them I think has a little bit better taste, and people that are I'm not saying that Justin, like when Justin Lin was working on those movies, like he's a talented guy, but there's something about the people that Cruise aligns himself with that I think it's like, you know, you always want to put yourself in a room with smart people because they
Yeah.
make you look better than who you are. But
Yeah.
those two careers
Are
aren't
like
that
two
far
peas in a
off.
pod, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're like alternate universe twins or something.
But yeah,
Like,
Michelle Rodriguez and
yeah,
Vin Diesel's characters in the Fast movies
have
have
nothing.
no
Yeah.
sexual chemistry. And then I think, like, even though the Mission Impossible movies, I think now rival the Bond films in terms of the action set pieces, the sensuality and sexuality in Bond movies now have become a little bit more progressive. And like, I look at a scene in Skyfall where Naomi Harris is shaving Daniel Craig's character. That is a very sexy, sensual
Not
moment.
overtly like needs to be a
No.
sex scene, but it's still very sexy. Yeah.
Yeah, and like that has never, there's nothing in the Mission Impossible movies that are like that. I think they're mostly asexual and I mean, not to say that like the Rebecca Ferguson, you know, doing this sniping bit is amazing, but
Oh
like,
yeah.
but in terms of like chemistry between leads, it's almost like, okay, well, if you're gonna have, if you put this into the movie, why not have it between new spies that you introduce into the franchise?
The entity came for us, but we overcame it. Okay, we're back. I'm on a different camera. I don't have headphones on now. We're like half an hour, 45 minutes after we last got cut off because literally someone was listening, Eric, and they tried to take us down. Both our computers froze and just completely crapped out. Like internets went down. So maybe the entity is listening, but we're back.
Or Isai Morales?
Yeah, who knows? Nicholas Holt is taking revenge on having to do what did he do instead of this?
Renfield.
Oh, that's wow. Whatever. All right. We
Oh no, I think it was the show that he's on with Elle Fanning. I think that was the scheduling issue.
Okay, that's probably whatever. We'll see. But we were talking about the women of Mission Impossible. We were wrapping all of that conversation up of how it hasn't really worked in the last couple of movies. I don't know where exactly we got cut off. I'm sure I'll chop it up at some point and put a technical difficulty or maybe just a monologue from the entity. But you wanted to finish with a Mission Impossible ranking, and then we'll kind of wrap this up. I think people got a good handle on our feelings over the last hour or so we can start to wrap everything up here.
Yeah.
I mean, I've alluded to it throughout this. I don't know if I gave explicitly my ranking. I think we both maybe probably posted it on Twitter. But my original tweet still stands after seeing this movie. Still had a good time with it. I had many criticisms, as you heard, but I still overall, even with those criticisms, still really enjoyed the movie and still really enjoy the Mission Impossible franchise as a whole. Like, I think it's one of my favorite action franchises, if not the top action franchise right now. And I think I like every movie except for the second one to like a certain extent. Like I think even the second one, like I wouldn't skip it on a rewatch. I would still watch it because it's eccentric and sort of strange and of its time and very John Woo in the worst ways and some John Woo in the good ways. But like, so my ranking fully goes, number 1, Mission Impossible Fallout. I gotta actually pull up my ranking. Number 2, I have Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. Number 3, I have Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, or did I have 3 above that? I think I had 3 Mission Impossible 3, then 4 Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, then 5 Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, then 6 Mission Impossible, and then 7 Mission Impossible 2. I believe is my ranking off memory. I haven't gone back and looked, but I think I think any given day I could probably switch 3 and uh
4?
4. No, 3 and 4, or even
Rogue Nation?
Rogue Nation. Like those 3, I think Fallout is my clear number 1 and Mission Impossible 2 is my clear number 7.
But
And
some
then
of these are interchangeable then.
yeah, all of those ones in between I feel like could switch around. But I do have a soft spot for when the franchise was kind of picking different directors each movie, and each movie had its different flavor. So I have my Macquarie movie with Fallout, like, which I think is his pinnacle of Mission Impossible with that. I love Brad Bird's Ghost Protocol because that really felt like taking the franchise to the next level, like those IMAX sequences with the Burj Khalifa and like the desert sequences and like everything, the hallway sequence and the tech and gadgetry in that movie, I think is amazing. Just Brad Bird coming and doing a live action film. Like I thought that was like awesome. And then obviously a soft spot for J.J. Abrams and Mission Impossible 3 and Philip Seymour Hoffman. So then you get into the secondary McQuarrie for me, which Rogue Nation is amazing, and obviously was McQuarrie's kickoff to this franchise, and I think it's really really good. Um, and then you have this movie, which I feel like is still really enjoyable, and I still think I like it more than that first movie because just modern Mission Impossible is more my vibe than original Mission Impossible, which De Palma. But that movie is obviously a classic. I still think it holds up, still very much of its time, but still iconic. We mentioned some of the villains, and the imagery in that movie still stands out. And then Mission Impossible 2, like I mentioned with the John Woo stuff, is just kind of a little all over the place, but still overly, like, I think still unique enough and of its time enough with the motorcycle sequences and the leather jackets and the slow motion double gun shooting and the doves and everything. It's like I still think it's worthwhile, even if it's very silly in a bad way, and but I would still rewatch it. So I think that's saying something. So overall, amazing franchise. That's my ranking.
Yeah, mine's actually not too far off from yours. Mission Impossible Fallout is my number one. Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol is my number two. Mission Impossible Rogue Nation is my number three. Number four is Dead Reckoning Part One. Number five is Mission Impossible. Number six is Mission Impossible 3. And at number seven, Mission Impossible 2. Two, it's easy to shit on, but like I remember watching that in the theater and thinking to myself, man, this is just not only the worst parts of John Woo, who is, I mean, like Hard Boiled, one of the greatest action movies of all time, but it's also the worst elements of ripping off The Matrix, where it felt like after the success of
Yeah.
that film, every movie was doing not only the slow-mo thing, but you mentioned, dressing up in leather and even borrowing from people like Ridley Scott and Tony Scott with some of the more worldly music cues, and kind of like just it's very over the top and silly, even though it's
Chimera. Was
yeah
that
it's
Chimera?
it's gotten a little bit of a reappraisal, and some people I think who maybe didn't grow up at the time when it was released, who are growing up now or in their early 20s or even mid to late 20s, maybe appreciate it more than we do because they just they weren't with it at that time. So maybe there's something there where like the nostalgia is different for us,
Right.
or there is no
Nostalgia in a
nostalgia.
negative way for
Yeah.
us instead of it just taking for it. And maybe a nostalgia, not even nostalgia, but I can see people going back and like it is absurd and it is over the top, just like the modern ones are, but like in a very different, very, early 2000s, late 90s, like
Yeah,
kind
early
of way.
2000s,
Like,
because even though again, like the romance in that with Tom Cruise and Tandy Newton doesn't work
yeah,
at all. It's the film that feels the closest to being a parody of itself. Like it's going into that, and that's also maybe another reason why, because it was coming out like just after not only The Matrix, but with the Austin Powers movies.
right.
Like there was this thing where the parody of it all was kind of coming into
Tom Cruise
play.
in the third one in Goldmember, right? In
Yeah,
Austin Powers. Like, yeah. So I think, again, I think most people, Fallout and MI2 are those kind of bookends. And then everything in between is kind of like, I think no matter what order you have those movies, you're not wrong. Like, I don't think I
no,
would argue with anyone who, like, I would maybe argue, how do you not have Fallout at number one, or MI2 at but even you putting three like lower down and I have three further up, like all of those movies are still, I think, enjoyable, at least, like at minimum, and very good at best, and amazing even then. But like yeah, it's just a very consistent kind of franchise. And I don't know if McQuarrie and maybe Tom Cruise just got used to him and he'll stick around, because Tom Cruise did say he wants to keep making these movies until he's like 100. Um,
Well, he was
so
talking about like Harrison Ford, right? Like
yeah,
being in his 80s and still doing these films. And, I don't know if Christopher McQuarrie will be along for the ride as a director and writer,
love him. I hope he's not though. Like I
yeah.
kind of hope that he finishes after Dead Reckoning Part 2, and then I'm fine with Cruise staying on. And I even liked what they were trying to do with Jeremy Renner, even though it didn't really stick
That he was going to
with
take the reins and kind of become
yeah,
the,
and
the
continue it.
reigner.
I'm sure there will be someone who takes over and continues the Mission Impossible movies, right? And they'll stick with that, like someone who wants to do death. I don't know if there'll be anyone like Tom Cruise again, but I'd be totally okay with someone taking over and continuing the franchise. Not Jeremy Renner at this point, but like um when Renner was going to take over every franchise, he was going to take over Bourne and Mission Impossible
And then
and
they were like,
Daredevil.
they stepped that back
Um,
a little bit. It's like, no, the magic here is always Cruise, because it was a feeling like, oh, Cruise would kind of go on to do something else and pass the baton. But in a weird way, like Top Gun Maverick, you have this whole narrative of, okay, let's build up the next generation. Oh, wait a second, let's
I am
push
the
them.
next generation.
The past generation is the only good generation, and it kind of feels
Yeah.
weird, and that's
Oh,
where that kind of
totally.
regressiveness
We
also
can't
comes
let
into play.
go, and we can't like yeah. So, I'm fine with Cruise sticking around, or if they give it to someone else, but I would like them to not. I love Christopher McQuarrie. Everyone go watch Live Die Repeat. Um
Well, it's Doug Lyman,
Yeah, I know, but
but
he
he
wrote
wrote,
it.
yeah, he wrote it, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
like I still think that I don't necessarily attribute that fully to Christopher McQuarrie, but one of the things, just as a writer, I think he's also
But
one of
Top Gun Maverick
the.
too, right? Like, I
Yeah, he
think
was a
like he
writer on
came
that as
in
well.
and
Yeah.
really kind of made it all about the nuts and bolts of what makes a good action
And
movie.
obviously they are a great team. I liked the idea of passing it off to someone else and them putting their own stamp and feeling different, but still feeling like a Mission Impossible movie, right?
Yeah.
Like I would say, 3 feels like a J.J. Abrams movie, and 2 feels like a John Woo movie, and 1 feels like a Brian De Palma movie. And maybe we don't know what a Brad Bird movie is, but it does feel like a Brad Bird movie. I mean, that's diminishing his animated stuff, and I shouldn't do that. But like, I mean, a live action Brad Bird movie at that time. But like,
But it has no
um,
limitations. Like, I think one of the great sequences in um Protocol, I mean, obviously even like the Lost stuff coming into that movie a little bit with Josh Holloway at the beginning of the movie,
well,
but
JJ was still a producer up to this one, which we never touched on, but I almost weirdly think like there's a polish to JJ Abrams and Bad Robot stuff that
a slickness,
a
yeah.
slickness that I like, and I feel like is a little bit missing from this movie, and I think that's sort of telling to me that this is my least favorite since he joined, and it is the one that JJ's not involved in at all, or Bad Robot's not involved in at all. So anyways, but you were talking about Ghost Protocol.
But yeah, that the editing in these movies I think is really important as well. And we didn't talk a lot about it, but the pacing of it, but the pacing specifically in the scene where you're cross cutting between two different sequences where you have, Paula Patton and Leah Seydoux kind of having their squaring off in a moment, and then you also are cutting with, Cruise climbing on the
Oh,
side of
that
a
movie
building.
rules.
Yeah, like that, like those sequences, the way that like they complement each other but also
The different panes of
contrast.
action, right? And like
Yeah.
different panes of things, like which in this movie has that. We have Benji. We didn't talk about Benji much, or
Or Luther, Ving
Luther, but
Rhames.
like they're kind of like they're fine in this movie, and I liked some of the stuff with Benji with the puzzle box and stuff like that. But
They're my
um,
friends.
yeah, I did like that though. That actually hit me where
It's
I'm like,
more
they don't.
genuine than Vin Diesel
Yeah,
saying family all the
yes, I
time.
agree, and I feel like, because they don't have anything, that's all he really has at this point. Like, Benji probably lost his whole life, Luther lost his life, like, they all lost their life because they're in, with Ethan they've been disavowed 400 times, and, like, yeah, I each movie had its own kind of, like, flavor to it, and that's kind of what, not that I miss that the McQuarrie movies aren't necessarily blending in with one another, because this one, he is trying to do something different than what he did in the last couple, but I liked this being that action franchise that a filmmaker could come into, um, and we saw with, Brad Bird and JJ, them being their first films basically, and like live action for Brad Bird, and JJ just his first feature. And like I kind of like that if someone putting like their own spin on it. So I would like them to go back to that. But I'm very excited for Dead Reckoning Part 2. Um, did they already shoot it or
I think they shot part of it because people like Angela Bassett and
right?
Holt McElhaney, there are photos of them, and there are certain actors that are in the first movie, not Dead Reckoning Part 1, but the first film, that are also coming back for Part 2 that Macquarie has shown photos of. But another thing as well, in terms of the directors, why not bring in a woman or a person of
Yeah,
color, or someone that's non-binary? Because
totally.
like it's just been a bunch of white dudes.
Yeah,
you know
yeah.
and maybe that will also challenge and change, the perspective of things, and play on new angles of material we've seen before, but in a fresh way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's gonna wrap it up for us. We both gave the movie a 4 out of 5. That was a while ago at this point, but I'll reiterate that. Still a super enjoyable summer blockbuster. And like even with my nitpicky stuff or comparing it to the other franchise, uh, other moments in the franchise, like I just think this is a great franchise. So even though I'm saying, hey, it doesn't really work as well as these other ones, still a super good movie. I still think you should go see it in theaters, see it in IMAX if you can. You only have a short window to do that. But if you're listening to this, you probably already did so. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let us know in the comments what you guys thought. Tweet at us, thread us. We're on Threads now. I still don't quite know how to use it properly. I'm like overthinking it where I'm like, do I just use this like Twitter, or I'm like, I don't know if my reach is the same. I need a follower feed, all this kind of stuff. But yeah, follow me on all social media platforms, including Threads at Matt Rohrbeck. Can find more of my work around the internet. You should still see some of my stuff on Family Feud Canada and other things like that. TIFF's coming up, so keep it locked here. We'll be back with the main show at some point doing TIFF talk and probably a mental health talk and theme park talk and all this kind of other stuff. But we'll get there. We're just trying to build up reviews first. So, but we really appreciate all of you kind of welcoming us back as we got into the swing of things this summer.
Yeah, and you can find more of my video reviews and interview with Henry Czerny on rogerstv.com, and you can search Cinema Scene. And also, if you guys have time to, write a review on iTunes, that would be great. It always helps with.
Apple Podcasts.
Yes, sorry.
You're living in the 2000s.
Well, I'm living in the same time as Mission Impossible 2. Just
Yeah.
take a look around.
You got Limp Bizkit on the brain. That's what you're downloading on your Apple iTunes.
It's just one of those days, Matt. So yeah, and you can follow me on all the social medias, including Threads, which I have no idea really how to use, at EM6211.
And then on Letterboxd, Untitled
Yeah.
_movies. We're also on Threads and Instagram. I changed it so it's Untitled Movie Podcasts, all one, just so it's a little bit more clear for people on Threads, and which Threads and Instagram are so connected that you had to change it on both.
Intertwined,
So,
if you will.
yeah, so I don't know if we'll change all of our handles, and I know it's not the best to have different handles everywhere, but Untitled Movie Podcasts, plural, on Threads and Instagram, and then Untitled _movies everywhere else, including Letterboxd. So this was a long one, but it's a big old movie. We'll be back with part 2, and we'll be back soon with more reviews. We'll have reviews of Barbie and Oppenheimer. As those will probably come after those movies drop, because I'm seeing them a Barbenheimer double feature next Thursday. So whether we get those on Friday or maybe we'll wait till the Monday, we'll see how everything goes, and if we record those over the weekend. We'll also have Haunted Mansion, Strays, a couple other kind of stragglers throughout the July and August before and we're credited for TIFF again. Yay! So we're excited to be covering the festival once again. Until next time.
This review will now self-destruct.
It almost did. I was worried. Bye, everyone.